Her true story from Oklahoma. My daughter slammed my door and said, "This ain't a nursing home," so I left and took the inheritance deed with me. They said I overstayed. I reminded them who paid. This ain't no hotel. This sure ain't no nursing home. If you can't pay rent this month, then get the hell out. The sound of her voice cut through the house like a slap. It was just past 8 o'clock in the evening, and the cold from the January wind still clung to my sleeves as I reached for my coat near the front door. My hands were trembling, not from fear, not yet, but from that old familiar ache that winter brings to bones that have worked too long and rested too little. I had just come from the laundry room, where I had folded every towel in that house and wiped down the shelves. My back ached in a way I no longer mention, because mentioning pain gets you two things in this world: pity or annoyance, and I was not interested in either. Then it came. Her door slammed, and I swear the whole hallway shook. I flinched instinctively, as if I were 10 years old again and someone had just broken a plate over my head. I stood there, coat still in my hand, frozen, not from the cold, but from the cruelty. That was my daughter, my baby girl, the same girl I once nursed through pneumonia in a one-bedroom apartment, holding her upright through the night while her little chest rattled like a broken toy. The same girl I skipped meals for so she could have field trip money in 5th grade. I did not speak. I did not shout back. I gently hung the coat on the hook, turned, and walked down the hall toward the guest room. My steps were slow, not from weakness, but from the kind of sorrow that drags behind you like a long, invisible train. The walls of that hallway had family photos, smiling faces frozen in happier times, birthdays, graduations, a blurry beach trip from years ago. There was one of me even, taken before the gray streaks took over my hair. I looked at it and wondered who that woman was. I passed the kitchen on my left, where I had cooked dinner just a few hours ago. Spaghetti, garlic bread, salad, my grandson's favorite. He had hugged me afterward, said thank you, and ran upstairs. My daughter had said nothing, just looked at her phone, then at the pile of mail on the counter. One envelope had my name on it, unopened. The electricity bill I had paid last month with the last of my pension check. I did not need the thanks, not really. But sometimes silence hurts louder than any insult. I entered my room, the one they called Mom's room when guests were over, but referred to as the spare every other time. It was small, just enough space for a bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. I sat down on the edge of the bed and listened. I could hear the TV upstairs, the dull sound of a reality show she watched every night. I could hear her husband laughing. He never spoke to me directly unless something was broken or missing. I waited until the sound of footsteps faded before I let myself breathe deep. I whispered, not loud enough for anyone to hear, "You could have at least asked who paid for this house," because it was me. I was the one who put down the down payment when their credit score was not enough. I was the one who co-signed the mortgage so they could move into a better school district. I was the one who sent the extra checks, quietly, month after month, whenever a medical bill or a car repair crept in. Not because I had to, because I wanted to see them safe, because I wanted my grandchildren to grow up with more than I had. I did not tell anyone what I had given up. I sold my condo after the fall, the one where I lived alone but peacefully. I told myself it was for the best. Too many stairs, too far from the hospital. But really, I missed the quiet there. I missed the freedom. I missed the feeling of sitting in a chair that no one questioned, of boiling water just for one cup of tea without being asked if I was wasting electricity again. When I moved in here, it was supposed to be temporary. After I slipped on the ice and broke my hip, she had offered, or maybe suggested, I do not know anymore. She said it would help me recover, that the kids would love having me around. And at first they did. They called me Grandma, like it meant something. They crawled into my bed with sticky fingers and bedtime stories, and I felt like I had purpose again. But slowly, the warmth turned into rules, then silence, then resentment. I was not a guest. I was not family. I was a burden, an expense, an inconvenience. I kept a notebook, secretly, tucked between the pages of an old crossword puzzle book. In it, I wrote down every time she asked me for money, every time I paid a bill, every time I picked up the kids from school when she ran late, every time I stayed home so they could go on a weekend getaway. It was not for revenge, it was for memory. Because when people start rewriting history, You need to remember the truth. And the truth was this: I built this life. I held it together with my calloused hands and my good intentions. I loved them so hard, I forgot to love myself. That night, I slept little. I laid there, eyes open, watching the shadow of the tree outside sway across the window pane. I thought of my own mother, how she died in a nursing home, with strangers calling her sweetie, and no one visiting her after the first month. I promised myself then I would never let that happen to me. But somehow, even living under the same roof as family, I felt more alone than she must have in that sterile white room. By morning I had made a decision, not a loud one, not a final one, but a quiet shift in my spirit. I rose early as I always did. I made pancakes for the children. I poured her coffee. I smiled. She did not. Her eyes were red. She had probably been crying or yelling or both, but she did not speak to me. Not a word. I went back to my room, pulled open the drawer of the nightstand, and took out the envelope. It was old, slightly yellowed, but the contents were intact. Inside was the deed, the original deed to the house, and the name on it was mine. She did not know that. Or maybe she forgot. Maybe she assumed time had erased my name, the same way it had erased my voice in this home. I put the deed in my purse. Later that day, when she left for work, I stood in the driveway and waved to the children as they were driven off to school. Then I called a taxi. Not to leave, not yet, but to visit someone. My lawyer. I was not angry, I was just finished. There are years of my life that no one ever asks about. The quiet years, the hard years, the years where everything I did was for someone else. And now, sitting in this spare room they let me use like a borrowed coat, I cannot help but remember them all. I was 23 when I married Earl. He was already coughing by then, but we thought it was just the weather, or the mill, or maybe bad luck. No one talked about chronic illness back then. You just worked through it, like everything else. We had our first baby a year later, then another, then another. 3 children, one after the other. No breaks, no rest, just bottles, diapers, scraped knees, and sleepless nights. Earl did his best until his body gave out. The coughing turned to hospital stays, then medications, then debt. By the time our youngest turned 5, Earl was mostly in bed, and I was working nights as a cleaner in a downtown office. I would come home just in time to make breakfast, kiss their cheeks, walk them to school, and go back to cleaning apartments in the afternoon. Sleep came in 2-hour naps, if I was lucky. There were no birthday parties, not the kind with decorations or clowns or wrapped presents. I made cakes from boxed mixes and lit 1 candle. They smiled anyway, because they did not know better. On Christmas, I crocheted mittens and wrapped oranges in tissue paper. They never said it was not enough, but I knew. I remember one winter when our heater broke and we could not afford to fix it. I boiled water on the stove and poured it into the bathtub so the kids could warm their feet before bed. I slept in my coat. I gave them the blankets. I told them it was like camping. They believed me. I sold my wedding ring to pay for Sarah's dental surgery. I pawned my mother's brooch to cover Mark's field trip to Washington, D.C. I skipped meals when grocery money ran short and drank tap water with lemon slices to trick my stomach into thinking I was full. I did it gladly. That was motherhood. And through it all, I never once thought I was owed anything in return. But now, as I sit here, uninvited to their family dinners, whispered about in their hallway conversations, I wonder how we got here. How love so unconditional became so transactional. How I became extra. How I became in the way. I was never ambitious in the way the world measures ambition. I did not dream of climbing ladders or building empires. I dreamed of stability, of a family that did not have to count pennies, of children who would grow up knowing they were safe. When Earl passed, I did not cry at the funeral. I had cried every night for 3 years already. He died holding my hand, and I whispered to him, I got it from here. And I did. I worked until retirement age, took no vacations, turned down promotions if they meant more time away from home. I saved what I could. I taught my children to work hard, to respect others, to clean up after themselves. I raised them on patience and leftovers and second-hand everything. And when they grew up, they left. That is natural. That is what you hope for, in a way. You raise them to be strong enough to go. But they went farther than I expected. Not in miles, in memory. They forgot the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, forgot the way I braided their hair when lice went around, forgot the second job, the third job, the smiles I forced when the lights were shut off again. I do not say these things to guilt them. I say them because they happened, and because when I needed help, real help, not a handout, just a roof, a place to belong, they treated me like an intruder in the house I helped them build. When I moved in, I told myself it was a blessing. My daughter was successful. She had a home with a backyard and a garage and 2 bathrooms, things I never had. I told myself I would not be a burden. I would help, I would contribute, and I did. But I was never asked what I needed. Not once. No one noticed when I skipped my medication to save money. No one asked if I missed my friends from the senior center. No one asked if I was lonely. I tried to make it easier. I cleaned, I cooked, I watched the kids. I smiled when I was tired. I nodded when I was ignored. I made myself small. But no matter how small I made myself, they still saw me as too much. So I began to keep to myself. I wrote in my notebook. I said grace before breakfast, even when no one else bowed their heads. I carried memories in silence, of a life spent giving and a heart that no one asked about anymore. Now, looking out this narrow window at a yard I helped pay for, I think about the irony of it all. I was never too tired to help them, but now I am too tired to beg them to see me. They think I am just an old woman who overstayed, but I remember everything. And that memory, that is what they should fear. When I first moved in, it was supposed to be a comfort for both of us. I had just retired after 42 years of working and worrying and giving without pause. My legs had begun to ache more than usual, especially my right knee, which never fully healed after a slip on the ice years ago. My little apartment was upstairs, and climbing those steps became harder every week. So, when my daughter said, "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a while?" I said yes without much hesitation. I thought it would be temporary, a few months to rest, to be around family, to maybe find a senior center nearby and start some community classes or join a knitting circle. I missed my grandkids. I missed the sound of little feet, the smell of peanut butter sandwiches, the kind of chaos that only lives in a house where children grow. I thought, naively I suppose, that being closer would mean being needed, being loved, being hugged. The first few weeks felt warm. I cooked dinner every night. I folded towels without being asked. I babysat on weekends. My daughter would smile and say thank you in passing, but I didn't need more than that. At my age, gratitude is often silent. I took what I could, but slowly the energy shifted. The guest room I was staying in became a temporary storage space. Boxes filled the corners, holiday decorations, spare pillows, old college books, and I was expected to work around them. I never complained. I just folded the blankets neatly every morning and made the bed with hospital corners, a habit I never quite gave up from my caregiving years. One evening, while they were hosting friends for dinner, I overheard her speaking in the kitchen. I was walking past to take out the trash, something I did daily because they forgot most nights. A friend of hers asked, "Where's your mom staying now? That guest room looked cute in your photos." She laughed. "Oh, that's just for Airbnb now. My mom's in the basement temporarily. She's fine. Says it's quieter down there." I stopped mid-step. She didn't know I was in earshot. The basement? That dusty concrete-floored room with a single pull-out couch and a water heater that hissed all night? I had moved my things down there the week before because they said the guest room needed repainting. I told myself it was just a temporary arrangement, but hearing her tell someone else, so casually, that I was a placeholder, a filler between rental bookings, shattered something in me. She had stopped calling me Mom around the house. It was her, or she, or my mother, said like an afterthought. She did not do it out of cruelty. It was worse. She did it out of habit, like I had become furniture. My grandchildren still hugged me, still ran to me when they scraped their knees, but even they began to absorb the cues. "Grandma, why do you sleep downstairs? Mom says we're not supposed to bother you too much. You're like our nanny, right?" I laughed when they said it. I always laughed, but my throat burned every time. The house became a business more than a home. I started noticing how my daughter and her husband had converted the upstairs bedrooms, each one with matching bedspreads, hotel soaps, guest baskets with little cards that read, "Welcome to your cozy home away from home." I cleaned those rooms when guests left, changed the sheets, scrubbed the bathroom grout, all while staying invisible. Sometimes, when they were out, I would sit on the edge of those beds and stare at the walls, perfectly curated. No family photos, no sign that a woman who raised 3 children and buried a husband lived in the house. I felt like a stranger in a museum, built on memories no one acknowledged. One Sunday morning I made breakfast before church. Pancakes, eggs, sausage, the kind of breakfast that used to mean something. As everyone ate, my daughter scrolled on her phone. "Mom, we've got guests coming tomorrow. Can you make sure the front porch is clean and wash the linens today? Oh, and don't use the upstairs bathroom. I just stocked it for the guests." I nodded. Of course. That was all I said. Later that night, I found myself sitting in the laundry room, holding a damp pillowcase to my face just to muffle the sound of my breathing. Not crying. I had cried too much in my life. Just breathing. Just remembering that somewhere along the way I had stopped being seen. My room downstairs, if you could call it that, had no closet. I hung my clothes on a rolling rack they'd bought at Walmart. My shoes stayed in a bin. I asked once if I could bring my rocking chair from storage, and she replied, "It'll make the space feel cluttered." So I didn't ask again. There was no place for me. Not really. Once, I tried to hang a photo, me and Earl on our 20th anniversary, standing under a tree in the park where he first proposed. My daughter found it 2 days later and took it down. "We're keeping the decor neutral, Mom. Airbnb guests don't like too much personal stuff." I said nothing, but that night I lay awake and realized something I had never wanted to admit. This was not my home. I was not family. I was staff, a silent helper who lived in the basement and cleaned for free. A bonus amenity. A woman who had become so useful, she was now disposable. And still, I stayed. Because where would I go? Retirement homes cost more than I had. My pension barely covered groceries. My friends were scattered or gone. I told myself every day, just 1 more month. Maybe she'll soften, maybe things will get better. But each day, the wall grew higher, her voice sharper, her warmth colder. I had given her everything I had, my energy, my time, my savings, even this house. And now I slept beside a boiler in a cement room. And when I spoke, it was mostly to myself, quiet words, careful thoughts, because in this house there was no space for my voice. So I smiled when I was introduced as just Mom. I nodded when I was asked to clean. I lowered my eyes when she dismissed my suggestions. I became what they wanted, a ghost who folded towels. But ghosts remember. Even when no one sees them, dinner used to be sacred. Growing up, we sat around a square table with mismatched chairs, hands folded, mouths quiet, until grace was said. My mother taught me that the table was where respect was shown, where laughter belonged, and where every voice mattered, even the softest ones. But in this house, dinner became something else entirely. It became a production, a schedule, a hierarchy. That night, the table was full. My daughter had invited friends over, another one of their rental management meetups. They talked numbers and guest reviews, strategies for turning more spaces into short-term rentals. The dining table was set with cloth napkins and wine glasses. I had helped prepare the meal, rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, salad with homemade vinaigrette. I stood behind the kitchen island as they served themselves. No one offered me a plate. No one said, "Sit down, Mom." I waited, unsure. I heard my grandson's small voice cut through the buzz. He was standing by the living room doorway, a paper plate in his hands. "Grandma, why are you eating in here? Don't you want to sit with us?" He was looking at me. Just me. His head tilted, with the same confusion I'd once seen in his mother's eyes, decades ago, when I told her we could not afford a birthday party that year. Before I could answer, my daughter turned sharply from the table and snapped, "She's fine. She prefers the living room. Mom always says the TV helps her focus." She said it like a joke. Everyone chuckled. I did not. I sat on the edge of the couch, my plate balanced on my knees, fork scraping quietly as I chewed each bite without tasting it. The TV was on some home renovation show. I stared straight ahead. My grandson didn't laugh. He sat next to me for a minute, then got up when his mother called him back. 10 minutes later, after the guests had left, I was in the kitchen wiping down counters. My daughter walked in, her heels clicking against the tile. "Mom, next time could you just stay in your room during dinner with guests? It's awkward when you linger." I turned slowly. I was helping with dishes. She sighed, poured herself a glass of wine, and said, "Being a mother doesn't entitle you to everything. This is our house now. You need to respect how we run it." I nodded. That was all I did. I nodded, as if she had told me the weather. As if she had not just taken a blade to everything I believed motherhood stood for. As if the very word mother did not deserve the seat at the table that had been mine since she first learned to hold a spoon. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the house grew quiet again, I returned to my room, my corner, my box, my assigned place. I did not cry. That phase of grief had passed. Instead, I went to the small dresser where I kept my most important belongings. Beneath a stack of scarves and a tin of lavender balm, I kept an envelope. It had traveled with me across 3 homes. It had yellowed edges and a small crease where I once folded it too quickly, but the signature on it was clear. My signature. On a deed. The house, this house, was still in my name. When they applied for the mortgage years ago, their credit had not been enough. I had offered, quietly, without fanfare, to take the house in my name and let them pay it off month by month. I never took a cent in rent. I just wanted them to have a home, a place to raise my grandchildren. I thought it would be a legacy. I thought it would mean something. But legacy does not mean much when the people inheriting it think you are just another obligation. I unfolded the document carefully. Read each line. It was all still there. My name, the address, the legal jargon that used to intimidate me but now felt like armor. I placed the paper flat on the dresser. My hand rested on it for a long time, not out of greed, not out of vengeance, but because it reminded me that I was not crazy. I was not imagining my worth. I was not just some old woman lingering in a house that did not belong to her. I had paid, not just with money, but with decades. I sat down in the chair by the window and looked out into the backyard. The string lights she had hung around the patio flickered softly. I remembered the first time I saw this yard, the way my granddaughter ran barefoot through the grass, chasing a butterfly. I remembered thinking, this is why I worked all those years, so she can have this. But now, she was being raised to believe I did not belong here, that I was extra, that I was awkward. Thought about the meals I had made, the nights I sat up with a feverish child while their parents were out late, the bills I had covered without being asked. None of that was written on the walls, none of it was hanging in a frame, none of it was honored. I was the woman who gave her name so they could build a home. And now, I was the name no one dared speak. But I remembered. And that night I opened a fresh envelope, slid the deed inside, sealed it carefully, and placed it back in the drawer, this time not for safekeeping, but for action. The next morning I placed the deed carefully back in its envelope and tucked it inside my purse. It felt heavier than it used to, not in weight, but in meaning. That paper was no longer just a formality. It was a lifeline, a reminder, a quiet promise to myself that I had not imagined the years, the sacrifices, or the role I once played in this family. I waited until the house was empty. My daughter had left for work, her husband too, the children were at school. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, letting the stillness settle around me like a shawl. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. He was an old friend, someone I had met through church decades ago, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and always offered you tea before getting down to business. When I explained what I needed, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure you want to do this, Ruth?" he asked gently. "You know it'll cause waves." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," I said. "I'm just reclaiming what I built." And I meant it. I was not acting out of spite. I had no interest in revenge, but I had spent enough years watching my name be erased from the life I had paid for. It was time to write it back in, firmly, clearly, legally. We scheduled the appointment for the following Thursday. I took the bus to his office on Main Street, carrying the envelope close to my chest. He welcomed me with a warm smile and chamomile tea. We sat at the same table where Earl and I once drafted our will. That felt like lifetimes ago. "I'd like to transfer the deed," I told him, "not to my daughter, to my son, my youngest." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just pulled out the necessary forms. My son David lived in Kansas. He was the only one of my children who still called me every Sunday. He never asked for money, never judged. He mailed me birthday cards with thoughtful messages, not just signatures. Last year he sent me a tin of lemon cookies with a note that read, "For all the sweet you gave me when the world wasn't kind." He had offered more than once to have me move in with him, but I always said no. I did not want to be a burden. I did not want to leave my grandkids. But now I saw things differently. Being near does not always mean being close. I signed the forms with a steady hand. The pen glided across the paper like it had been waiting its whole life to do this. My lawyer notarized everything, made copies, and said he would file them with the county office by the end of the day. "It'll take a few days for the records to update," he said, "but once it's done, your son will be the legal owner." I nodded. "Thank you." I left his office lighter, not because I had given something away, but because I had finally made a choice. For myself. For someone who deserved it. That evening, back at the house, my daughter walked in complaining about a guest's broken lamp and a bad review on Airbnb. I listened, I nodded, I even reheated dinner for the kids while she vented. But inside, something had shifted. A quiet strength had settled into my spine. I knew something she did not. I carried a truth she had ignored for years. I still mattered. Over the next few days, I went about my routines. I picked up groceries, I ironed shirts, I read bedtime stories, but I also began gathering my things, slowly, quietly. The photo albums, my knitting bag, the small jewelry box Earl had given me when we had nothing but love. I packed them into a suitcase I had not used since his funeral. Then, one morning, the call came. My lawyer confirmed that the deed had officially transferred. David was now the legal owner of the house. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the phone to my ear, and closed my eyes. I felt no triumph, just peace, a sense of finally being seen, if only by the universe. David called me that night. He did not ask why I did it. He just said, "Thank you, Mom. You didn't have to." "I did," I said softly. "I needed to." We spoke for an hour. We talked about the past, about Earl, about the garden I once had in Tulsa. He told me his youngest was learning to play piano, and I smiled imagining little fingers tapping out "Twinkle, Twinkle." It was the longest I had spoken to someone without feeling like I was interrupting their life. The next day, my daughter noticed the missing envelope from the drawer. "Mom, where's that property stuff you kept in here?" she asked while rummaging. "I sent it where it needed to go," I replied, folding laundry. She stared at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I've made arrangements." She blinked. "What kind of arrangements?" I looked her in the eye for the first time in weeks. "Legal ones." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I turned back to the laundry, and for once, she had no words. It started with a scream. Not from pain, but from panic. The kind that comes when power slips from someone's fingers before they even realize they were holding it. I was in the kitchen, slicing apples for the kids' afternoon snack, when I heard the front door slam and my daughter's heels stomp through the hallway. Her voice echoed off the walls. "Where is it? Where is the deed?" She tore through the drawer in the living room, flinging open cabinets, yanking papers from folders I had neatly stacked. Her husband stood frozen by the stairs, holding his phone in one hand and confusion on his face. I set the knife down carefully, wiped my hands on the towel, and turned to face her. "What are you looking for?" I asked. She whirled around. Her face was red, hair wild from rushing. She held up an empty manila folder like it was a weapon. "The property deed, Mom. The one you kept in your drawer. Where is it?" I met her eyes, calm and unmoving. "It's no longer here." Her breath caught. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means I've transferred ownership." Silence. Then a laugh. Sharp, hysterical, laced with disbelief. "You're kidding. That's a joke, right? You think you can just, give it away?" "I didn't give it away. I assigned it to the rightful person." "Rightful? Are you serious? This is my house. I live here. My kids live here." I nodded. "And I lived here too, until you started treating me like a squatter." She took a step forward. "You had no right. None. This isn't just yours." "It was," I said evenly. "It still is. Or rather, now it belongs to David." Her face drained of color. "You put it in David's name?" "Yeah." Her hands balled into fists. "You've lost your mind. You're senile. This is elder abuse, reverse elder abuse, or whatever it's called. You can't just do that." "I can," I said. And I did. She stormed toward the hallway, grabbing her phone. "I'm calling the police." I didn't flinch. "Go ahead." She stared at me, like waiting for me to blink, to back down, to apologize, but I didn't. I simply stood there, next to a bowl of sliced apples, in the kitchen I had cleaned 1,000 times, in the house I had paid for, in the silence I had grown far too comfortable with. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a young man and a woman with tired eyes. My daughter met them at the door, flustered and frantic, waving papers and recounting a version of the story that painted her as the unsuspecting victim of her mother's betrayal. She transferred the house without telling me. She gave it to my brother. This is fraud, this is theft. The officers listened, took notes, and then asked to speak to me. We sat in the living room. I handed them the legal documents, the notarized forms, the deed, my lawyer's contact information. The woman officer scanned the pages and asked gently, "Ma'am, just to confirm, this house was in your name originally?" "Yes." "And you chose to transfer ownership to your son?" "Yes." "Were you pressured to do so in any way?" "No." She nodded, turned to my daughter. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your mother is of sound mind and she acted within her legal rights. Unless there's a written will or legal agreement naming you as the heir or co-owner, there's nothing we can do. She had every right to transfer the property as she saw fit." My daughter's mouth opened and closed. She looked like she might faint. "But I live here," the officer gave a sympathetic shrug. "That's a civil matter now. You'll need to work it out with the new owner, David." He had already called earlier that morning. I hadn't told him I expected a storm, but he knew, and he was ready. "He's going to be furious," he said. "She already is," I replied. Now, as she paced the floor, tears brimming, she turned to me and shouted, "You betrayed me." I didn't shout back. I didn't even blink. I said the words I had rehearsed silently for months. "No, you betrayed me. You turned me into an invisible woman in a house I helped you build. You pushed me into a basement, erased my name from your life, and treated me like clutter. I did not do this out of spite. I did it because you forgot who I was. And now, the law remembers, even if you never did." She stormed out of the room, slamming her bedroom door so hard the frames on the wall trembled. The police left quietly. The house was quiet again. I walked out to the porch and sat on the old rocking chair. The winter sun was fading, and the air smelled of firewood and endings. My fingers rested on the arms of the chair, steady and calm. Inside, I could hear my granddaughter watching cartoons, unaware that the ground beneath her home had shifted. Later that night, she came to me. "Grandma, is Mommy mad?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart, but she'll be okay. Did you do something bad?" "No," I said softly. "I just did something she didn't expect." She curled into my lap, small and trusting. I held her and rocked her until her breathing slowed. That night, I sat up late, watching the lights blink across the street. For once, I felt no guilt, only the solid, grounded sense that I had reclaimed something no one else could name: dignity. After the shouting stopped, after the slammed doors and ignored letters, what remained was silence. But not the kind that stings. It was soft, like the air after a thunderstorm. Still, honest, heavy with what survived. 2 weeks after the deed was transferred, David arrived from Kansas. He brought just a small bag, a thermos of black coffee, and an idea he had been carrying far longer. When he hugged me, he didn't say much, just held on a little longer than usual. Then he stepped back, looked at the house, and said, "It's time we made something meaningful out of all this." I thought he meant painting, maybe gardening, selling it someday. I didn't expect the words that came next. "What if we turned it into a community chapel?" I stared at him, unsure I heard right. "A place for women like you, Mom. Like us. People who gave everything and got forgotten. A space for kindness, for dignity. Not religion, but refuge." I didn't answer. I just nodded. The idea settled in my chest, like something I'd been waiting to hear for years. So we began. We cleared out the guest rooms, once filled with Airbnb sheets and impersonal decor. We scrubbed every wall, opened every window. I donated the fancy pillows and fake plants. They never meant anything to me. David built a simple lectern from old wood we found in the garage. I brought out my boxed-up hymnals. We laid a handmade rug beneath the front wall and placed a vase of olive branches on a small table. The living room became our chapel, not grand, not polished, but true. The kitchen stayed open for meals, the guest room turned into a small reading space, and the garage became a place for crafts and quiet hands. We named it The Olive Chapel. The name came to me one evening while folding linens. I thought of the olive tree, how it survives in poor soil, bends but doesn't break, and always offers something back. Oil, fruit, shelter, peace. David loved the name. We painted it in soft green letters above the doorway. No flashing lights, just a welcome. And slowly, people came. A few neighbors, an older woman from the senior center, a tired veteran who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. We didn't preach. We offered chairs, and time, and ears. Every Thursday we held open story gatherings, not scripted, not formal, just stories, real ones, stories of betrayal, of forgiveness, of survival. Women spoke who hadn't been heard in decades. Men cried and weren't shamed for it. Grandchildren sat beside grandparents and colored in silence that healed instead of hurt. I didn't stand at the front. I didn't lead. I just listened. I had said enough in my life. This time, I made room for others. One afternoon, a woman named Lillian held my hand and said, "This place makes me feel visible again." "You were always visible," I told her. "You were just never given a window." My daughter never returned. Months later, she sent a single text. "I saw what you did with the house. I guess it made you feel powerful. I hope it was worth it." I didn't answer, not from anger, from peace, because I had already spoken through every inch of repurposed space, every warm meal, every story shared in the chapel's small sanctuary. This house was never truly hers, and maybe not even mine. Not anymore. It belonged now to those who had nowhere else to go, who needed to feel safe, even for an hour. The Olive Chapel wasn't built for revenge. It was built for renewal, for the truth that even after being discarded, we can rise again, stronger, softer, sacred. Thank you for listening to my story. Maybe you've been called a burden. Maybe someone closed a door on you they forgot you helped build. But I'm here to remind you, quiet doesn't mean powerless, and age doesn't mean invisible. I didn't share this for pity. I shared it so you'd know you're not alone. So you'd remember that your voice still matters, that your story still matters. I have a story. I had a woman in a group ask me for my story. If this touched you, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you used to be, please subscribe to Grandma, True Stories, because here we speak the truths that were once whispered, and we remember what others tried to forget. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never let anyone tell you your time has passed.